She watched the most dangerous Mafia boss in the city get sentenced to life in prison. But before the guards dragged him away, he looked straight at her and smiled. Not because he had lost, because he knew something she didn't. 3 hours later, every witness in the case disappeared. The evidence vanished from police headquarters. And the only person left alive who knew the truth was the prosecutor who had just destroyed his empire. What nobody knew was that she had spent months trying to put him behind bars. What nobody could imagine was that somewhere between hunting him and understanding him, she had fallen in love with the one man she was sworn to destroy. But that wasn't even the biggest secret, because the man everyone called a ruthless monster had been protecting her long before she even knew his name. And when the truth finally came out, it would destroy both their worlds forever. There are moments that change a person's life forever. For Isabella Moretti, it happened inside a silent courtroom where justice was supposed to win. She stood proudly in front of the judge, confident that years of investigation had finally brought down the most feared criminal in the country. Across the room sat Alessandro De Luca. To the newspapers, he was a ruthless mafia king. To the police, he was untouchable. To every family that had suffered because of organized crime, he was the devil wearing an expensive suit. For 2 years, Isabella had sacrificed everything to build the perfect case against him. She skipped birthdays. She ignored friends. She barely slept. Every witness she found disappeared. Every piece of evidence somehow vanished. Every time she believed she was close, someone inside the system betrayed her. Yet somehow, she never gave up. Because justice wasn't simply her profession. It was the promise she had made to her father before he died. A decorated detective, killed while investigating the De Luca organization 20 years earlier. At least, that was the story she had believed her entire life. Now, standing only a few feet away from the man she blamed for everything, she expected anger, hatred, fear. Instead, Alessandro simply watched her. Calm, silent, almost proud. It made no sense. When the judge announced the guilty verdict, the courtroom erupted. Reporters celebrated. Police officers smiled. Families cried with relief. Only Alessandro remained completely still. Then he looked directly into Isabella's eyes and smiled. Not a desperate smile. Not a broken smile. It was the smile of someone who had already won. That single expression sent a chill through her entire body. Because for the first time since the investigation began, she felt like she had misunderstood everything. 3 hours later, the impossible happened. Every protected witness disappeared. The lead investigator was found dead. The evidence vault caught fire. And surveillance footage from police headquarters somehow erased itself. Within a single night, the biggest conviction in the country's history began collapsing. Someone powerful was cleaning the entire case. But why? If the mafia boss was already behind bars? Even stranger, before the prison transport left the courthouse, Alessandro secretly handed one sentence to the officer escorting him. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't an order. It was a warning. Protect the prosecutor. The officer laughed. He thought it was another mafia trick. He ignored it. By sunrise, someone had already tried to kill Isabella. A speeding truck nearly crushed her car. A sniper narrowly missed her outside her apartment. Someone had hacked into the security cameras protecting her home. And for the first time in her career, the prosecutor hunting the mafia became the hunted. She believed Alessandro's people wanted revenge. She had no idea. His own enemies wanted her dead because she was the only person who could expose something much bigger than the mafia itself. The deeper Isabella looked, the more impossible the truth became. Because every road, every murder, every missing witness, every corrupted judge led back to people wearing government badges instead of mafia tattoos. And somehow, Alessandro already knew. The only question was, why had he never defended himself? And why did he seem more worried about Isabella's life than his own freedom? Those answers would force her to question everything she believed about justice and about the man she had sworn to destroy. The attack outside Isabella's apartment changed everything. It wasn't random. It wasn't revenge. It was an execution that had failed. For the first time in her career, the woman who had spent years protecting witnesses became one herself. The government assigned armed officers to guard her around the clock. But within 48 hours, 2 of those officers were dead. The third had disappeared. There were no signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no surveillance footage, only silence. Someone wasn't just eliminating people. Someone was erasing them. That's when Isabella received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed her father standing beside another man. A man she recognized instantly. Alessandro's father. She stared at the picture in disbelief. According to every official report she'd ever read, the two men had been sworn enemies. So why were they smiling? Why were they shaking hands? And why had this photo been hidden for 20 years? The answers didn't come from the police. They came from prison. Unable to ignore the questions haunting her, Isabella requested permission to interview Alessandro one final time. She convinced herself it was only to strengthen the case before the appeals began. Deep down, she knew she was lying to herself. She needed answers. When she entered the prison interview room, Alessandro looked exactly as he had in the courtroom. Calm, collected, almost as if prison was merely another office. He didn't ask why she'd come. He already knew. She placed the old photograph on the table. For the first time since meeting him, his expression changed. Not fear, not anger, regret. A deep, painful regret. Isabella waited for him to deny it. He never did. Instead, he slowly pushed the photograph back toward her. Then he said something that shattered everything she believed. Your father died trying to save mine. The words echoed through her mind. Impossible. Her father had been a decorated detective. Alessandro's father had led one of the most feared criminal families in the country. Nothing about that sentence made sense. But Alessandro continued. Years ago, both men had discovered something far more dangerous than organized crime. A network of politicians, judges, police commanders, and wealthy businessmen. Men who controlled both sides of the law. They allowed the Mafia to exist because it distracted the public. As long as everyone blamed the criminal families, no one looked at the people giving the orders from expensive offices. When Isabella's father threatened to expose them, they murdered him. Then they blamed the Mafia. History accepted the lie. The room fell silent. Every memory she'd carried since childhood suddenly felt uncertain. Her father's death had shaped her entire life. It had driven her into law. It had fueled every late night, every sacrifice, every courtroom victory. What if that foundation had been built on a lie? Before she could ask another question, prison alarms suddenly blared. Guards rushed through the hallway. The interview was over. As officers escorted Isabella outside, one elderly prison guard quietly slipped something into her hand. A tiny silver key. He whispered only 4 words. Your father trusted him. Before she could respond, the guard collapsed. A sniper's bullet had pierced the prison window. Chaos erupted. Screams filled the corridor. People ran in every direction. But amidst the panic, Alessandro never moved. Instead, he looked directly at Isabella. Not with fear, with urgency, as if he already knew what came next. That night, Isabella used the silver key to open a forgotten safety deposit box hidden beneath an abandoned bank. Inside were dozens of files, old photographs, voice recordings, financial records, secret government payments. Everything pointed toward a covert organization operating above the law. One name appeared over and over again. Attorney General Victor Kane, the very man who had publicly praised Isabella after Alessandro's conviction. The same man who had promoted her career. The same man she had trusted for years. Her hands trembled. If these documents were real, she hadn't been fighting corruption. She had been working for it. Suddenly, her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. No one spoke. Then she heard a familiar voice. It was the prison warden, barely whispering. They're coming for you. The line went dead. Seconds later, her apartment exploded. Flames consumed everything she owned. Had she been inside, she would have died instantly. Standing across the street, hidden beneath the shadows, a black SUV waited. The driver stepped out. He wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a criminal either. He was one of Alessandro's oldest bodyguards. The man simply opened the passenger door. No threats. No explanations. Only one sentence. If you stay here, you'll be dead before sunrise. For several long seconds, Isabella stood frozen. Every instinct told her to run from anyone connected to the Mafia. Every piece of evidence now told her they might be the only people not trying to kill her. Sometimes survival isn't about choosing what's right. It's about choosing who's telling the truth. She climbed into the SUV. As the city lights disappeared behind them, Isabella realized something terrifying. Everything she had believed about justice, everything she had believed about evil, Everything she had believed about Alessandro was beginning to fall apart. But the greatest betrayal was still waiting, because the man responsible for destroying her family was someone she greeted with respect almost every single day. And by the time she learned his identity, someone she loved would have to die. The SUV never stopped until the city disappeared behind them. Hours later, Isabella found herself inside an old lakeside estate that looked abandoned from the outside. Inside, it was anything but empty. Computer screens covered the walls. Maps, photographs, financial records, and surveillance footage filled every room. This wasn't a mafia hideout. It was a war room. For years, Alessandro had quietly collected evidence against the people who truly ruled the city. He had known he could never defeat them through violence alone. Men like Attorney General Victor Kane didn't carry guns. They carried power. Power that reached into every courthouse, every police department, every television station. Power that made innocent people look guilty and guilty people untouchable. When Isabella finished reviewing the files, one painful truth became impossible to deny. Alessandro had committed crimes. He had built a criminal empire. He had blood on his hands. But he had never ordered her father's murder. Victor Kane had. 22 years earlier, Isabella's father discovered that Kane had been selling evidence, protecting criminal networks, and eliminating anyone who threatened his influence. Knowing he couldn't expose Kane through official channels, he secretly contacted Alessandro's father. Enemies on paper, allies in secret. Together they planned to release everything. They never got the chance. The night before the evidence became public, Kane betrayed them. Isabella's father was killed. Alessandro's father disappeared forever. The conspiracy survived. The lie became history. For a long time, Isabella couldn't speak. Everything she had dedicated her life to suddenly felt like a carefully constructed illusion. Yet Alessandro had never tried to clear his own name. He had allowed the world to hate him. Why? The answer came in another recording. Alessandro had made a choice years ago. If they believe I'm the villain, his recorded voice said, they'll never realize who the real monsters are. He had sacrificed his reputation to keep the conspiracy watching him instead of the evidence. It was the only way to keep the truth alive. Before Isabella could process what she'd heard, alarms echoed through the estate. Someone had found them. Vehicles surrounded the property from every direction. Not police. Private security. Men who officially didn't exist. Within seconds, gunfire shattered every window. The lights went out. The estate became a battlefield. Alessandro's loyal men fought to buy time. Not for themselves. For Isabella. Because she was now carrying the only complete archive proving Kane's crimes. In the middle of the chaos, Alessandro finally arrived. He had escaped prison. Not to run. To finish what her father had started. He looked tired. Older. As though years of carrying secrets had finally caught up with him. For the first time, Isabella saw not the feared mafia boss, but a man who had spent his life paying for choices made by generations before him. They escaped through underground tunnels beneath the estate, emerging near an abandoned railway bridge. But Kane was waiting. He had anticipated every move. Armed men surrounded the bridge. There was nowhere left to run. Kane stepped forward with the confidence of someone who had never lost. He admitted everything. The murders, the corruption, the false investigations, even Isabella's promotion. She had never been rewarded for talent. She had been carefully positioned where she could unknowingly protect his empire. The realization broke something inside her. Every courtroom victory, every celebrated conviction, every headline praising her integrity had been used to strengthen the very corruption she thought she was fighting. Kane smiled. Then he offered Alessandro a deal. Surrender the evidence. Walk away with Isabella. Forget the past. For a brief moment, silence covered the bridge. It sounded like mercy. But Alessandro understood men like Kane better than anyone. People who built empires on lies never kept promises. Without hesitation, Alessandro made his decision. He handed Isabella a small, encrypted drive. The truth belongs to you now. Then he walked toward Kane alone. The armed men shifted their attention. That single distraction was all Isabella needed. She ran. Behind her, gunfire erupted. She wanted to turn back. Every instinct told her to. But Alessandro's sacrifice would mean nothing if the evidence died with him. Tears blurred her vision as she reached a waiting train. Minutes later, the encrypted files reached every major news organization in the country. Judges, police commissioners, business executives, cabinet ministers. Their crimes flooded television screens before anyone could stop them. The country woke up to a truth buried for more than 2 decades. Victor Kane was arrested before sunset. His empire collapsed within days. Hundreds of hidden investigations were reopened. Families who had spent years searching for justice finally received answers. Yet victory carried a terrible cost. When authorities searched the bridge, they found no sign of Alessandro. No body, no witness, nothing. Some believed he had died in the river below. Others insisted he escaped into the darkness he had always known. Months passed. The city slowly began to heal. Isabella returned to the courtroom, but she was no longer the same prosecutor who believed justice was simple. She had learned that laws alone could not defeat evil. Only courage could. On the wall of her office stood 2 photographs. One of her father. The other had no frame. Just a folded picture kept inside her desk. A picture of Alessandro. She never showed it to anyone. One rainy evening, after another long day in court, Isabella walked through the crowded streets. Life had finally begun to feel normal again, until she noticed a man standing across the road. Dark coat, calm posture, watching from the shadows. He didn't wave. He didn't speak. He simply smiled. The very same smile he had worn on the day he was sentenced. A smile that had once filled her with suspicion, and now filled her with hope. Before she could cross the street, a passing bus blocked her view. When it moved on, he was gone. No footprints, no trace, only the rain falling quietly onto the empty pavement. Some stories don't end with a wedding. Some don't end with a goodbye. Sometimes love survives in silence, hidden between truth and sacrifice. And perhaps that was always their destiny. She had devoted her life to chasing justice. He had sacrificed everything to protect it from the shadows. The prosecutor and the mafia boss were never meant to share the same world. Yet, in the end, they saved it together. If he was still out there, he remained the most wanted man in the country. But in Isabella's heart, he was no longer the villain history had written. He was the man who carried every sin, every secret, and every sacrifice, so the truth could finally be set free. And somewhere beyond the city's endless lights, a man disappeared into the darkness once more, knowing that the woman he loved would never have to. The end.